President Donald Trump asked you to call, and you did. But what did you have to say? And lawmakers haven't returned to Topeka yet, but they're ready for the hottest of debates. Plus, a Wichita police officer hospitalized after an officer-involved shooting this week. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. They've become all too common in recent years, and now another one. An officer-involved shooting that sent the officer and a suspect to the hospital. The suspect, police say, tried to run over two officers Thursday in downtown Wichita, remained in critical condition Friday. Police are now releasing pictures of the incident where officers were trying to arrest the man on several warrants. Officers say a 29-year-old suspect was shot more than once and remains in critical. One officer suffered minor injuries, but two others are now on paid administrative leave after the shooting. Here are the pictures of the man wanted on warrants for several issues, including aggravated assault. You can see a Kansas Department of Corrections black SUV blocks the suspect vehicle. And next, you can see Wichita police officers approaching the car, eventually drawing their weapons when the suspect vehicle goes sideways, pinning or nearly pinning one officer. And at least one officer opened fire.
Spent several weeks attempting to locate this individual. When you have those type of charges and you know someone to be armed and dangerous, you do your best to try to get them off the streets as quickly as possible.
And we'd like to thank KSN News for sharing that video with us. Joining me here today to discuss this and other topics, we have Representative Elizabeth Bishop, Democrat from Wichita, and Representative Michael Capps, Republican from Wichita. Thank you both so much.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So as we look at this, and I think the first thing that came to mind when I heard the call, because I was in the newsroom when this happened, was we've had so many of these lately. Deputy Kunze earlier this year, 4 or 5 officer-involved shootings. When I was speaking with the Wichita Chief of Police a couple weeks ago, he was saying, we need help. We know that shootings, gun crimes, and murders are up. Is there something that you as lawmakers feel can be done? Michael, let's start with you.
You know, like you, I had an opportunity to visit with the chief as well as Sheriff Easter, and what we're hearing is that every situation is unique and different. However, a common theme is mental health. And while that sometimes is a buzzword that a lot of people are using, take that down one more layer, what we're hearing is substance abuse. I believe Sheriff Easter mentioned in excess of 70% of the inmates in our detention facility, even though they're in there for some other crime, there's an underlying substance abuse issue there. And so, I can't speak to this particular individual specifically. I know there's an ongoing investigation, but at the end of the day, there was a gun involved. Was there substance abuse? Well, I'm sure we'll find out. Was there other mental health, or was it simply somebody that was trying to, flee capture or flee arrest? I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, I think what the legislature is going to have to look at is an ongoing mental health issue and how we're going to address that. And I honestly don't know the solution to that yet, but I know a lot of people are talking about it.
Elizabeth?
I believe it is, I don't know about this particular instance, but the general fact that there does seem to be more violent crime going on and more of what I believe it's Sheriff Easter referred to as boneheaded crime, which is,
I do like that term.
which is the kind of thing of taking a loaded gun into a busy business at noon, and a shooting occurred, that sort of thing, which is definitely, in my opinion, probably tied to mental health and or substance abuse. And a lot of times they go hand in glove because substance abuse is used as for self-medication for a mental health issue. And there is it does appear to be an increasing amount of that.
Well, and as we talk about the mental health, something we can expect to hear a lot of in this coming session that starts this next week, because I know we did an entire half-hour special on the problems with mental health care and mental health coverage here in Kansas. Are you hearing some solutions presented to you from doctors, from mental health caregivers?
A number of them, some that the legislature will be involved with. One, for instance, is the need to allow Medicaid eligibility to follow the resident or the inmate of a jail or a prison or a mental facility like a hospital they're Medicaid eligible, disabled, Medicaid eligible, and they go into one of those facilities, excuse me, for a certain period of time, they lose that eligibility. It's terminated. Then they come out without meds, without quick access to medical intervention, doctor's care, and so forth, and just cycle right back into the criminal justice system. So we're working to make that a more smooth transition so that meds follow them, care follows them, and hopefully we keep them in treatment longer, hopefully,
More effectively.
More effectively, exactly. The other is the regionalization of behavioral health issues. Right now, too often we are sending people that have mental health problems, especially if they're involved with the criminal justice system, to either Larned or Osawatomie. Larned if they need an analysis for whether or not they can stand trial, competency hearings, or Osawatomie because we're in that catchment area. That's a lot of going back and forth. And then when they go, sometimes if they go to Larned for a competency hearing, turns out the professional that's supposed to conduct that isn't available that day, and they have to turn around and bring them all the way back here and send them all the way back to Larned another day. This is very expensive. Wow. They are beginning to do competency hearings here in Sedgwick County, and we really need a regional system so that the behavioral health care that's provided is here, it's closer to family and friends, and can be more effective in the long run.
Well, certainly, I'm sure we're going to talk about that a lot. I'm not trying to cut you out, Michael. I promise we will get to you the next round.
Other issues.
We have a lot of other things to talk about today. On Monday, Kansas lawmakers go back to work after watching a new governor take the oath of office. But some are showing they're already primed for some heated debates this year. I filed this story with Cake News this week.
I object to amend the bylaws. This is a non-debatable motion. The motion is should the chair's ruling be that is not a debatable motion, Senator.
Point of order is always in order.
This debate? It's over whether to elect a chair for the South Central Kansas caucus Thursday or next week after the legislative session starts. The root of the argument dates back to changes over the last 4 years as the group has gone back and forth over whether to continue a power sharing arrangement between Republicans and Democrats. But the real question is, do these short tempers
I'm offended that you would say your second time to speak.
Point to a tumultuous session once lawmakers go back to work in Topeka? Especially with a Democrat in the governor's office, but conservative Republicans with a stronger majority in the legislature.
I wouldn't put too much into this. I think we will have much more important fish to fry. And I will also confess that Senator Masterson and I, we have a fun relationship and that we both enjoy an animated debate.
And I will say, I've worked with Representative Carmichael quite a bit. He's been on the show several times, and he does enjoy getting those digs in and getting a debate going. But it really did feel like there was a lot of tension as lawmakers were meeting there, and for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, seemed to be along party lines. I know last session, the last couple of years, were kind of characterized by the increasing working across the aisle between moderate Republicans and Democrats. We now have a more conservative legislature. Is this kind of, are we seeing the end of that in what we saw there, or how are things feeling as you guys are working with other lawmakers getting ready? Michael?
I think you got to remember that, as a freshman legislator myself, in a class of more than 20, the freshman class, we come in with our eyes wide open and we're looking to do what's best for the state. So we're looking for those bipartisan across the aisle opportunities to engage. How that transcends as we get through the session is a different story. I think in the case of what we saw with the senator and the representative in the video is I think, Kansans got a brief glimpse of genuine democracy in action, which is discourse. And you know, at the end of the day, I think Representative Carmichael stated it very well, that even in that disagreement, even in that discourse, he still has a high level of respect for Senator Masterson. And when they walk away from that, you know, we went to lunch after that, and you know, that animosity doesn't exist. So there's a perception of that animosity, but really it's the passion that each one of us brings to our convictions and for our constituents in terms of what we're trying to create. So I like Representative Carmichael said, I don't think I'd read too much into it. I just really think that was a glimpse of democracy in action.
I believe that the group that within which that debate took place is the South Central Kansas Legislative Delegation. And the reason that that exists, and it's both the House and the Senate, and it's bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats together. And we are the folks that represent South Central Kansas. The idea is for us to get together and learn we have education sessions once a week during the session. Over the noon hours, somebody feeds us lunch and we get educated. And it's very positive. It helps us to all get on the same page and be ready and able to represent South Central Kansas well. What I think happened there is something that we may find some sensitivity about, and that is the reason there was the pushback is the feeling that perhaps there will be a direction of having Democrats become more bystanders rather than fully participants, and we will guard that.
Okay.
We intend to be full participants.
All right. And that right there, that is, as you said, democracy in action, making sure that everybody has a voice. All right. So other things to look at. Turns out Representative Carmichael wasn't done on that day. After lunch, he lobbed some tough questions at the Wichita school superintendent about her salary. Wichita Public School Superintendent Alicia Thompson joined other superintendents from South Central Kansas Thursday for a public forum with state lawmakers. According to the Wichita Eagle, Representative John Carmichael sparked, quote, a heated back and forth when he asked Thompson to explain why the district spends what it does on administration and support. In particular, the Eagle says Carmichael wanted the superintendent to explain her salary and why it's so high. At one point, the Eagle quotes Thompson as saying, "Sir, if you would like to visit with me privately or with my board, we would be happy to visit with you. But I am saying to you that my salary is commensurate to some of the other urban school districts in the country." The Eagle says Thompson makes $266,864 a year, base salary, with car and mileage allowance, a stipend for professional, civic, and incidental expenses, and pension contributions. The total package is $307,534 a year. Carmichael said he asked the questions because he consistently gets complaints from his constituents about the amount of money the district spends on administrators. And certainly, in a newsroom, I have gotten those same questions. Working in the school district, I would hear some of those same complaints. And yet at the same time, sitting down and looking at the budget and talking to other business leaders about the level of administration they have in the business world, you see different sides of this. What are you guys hearing? Are you guys hearing some of these same complaints as well, Elizabeth?
Administrative costs is always a big issue. And it's one that's very difficult to get at because it depends on how you define administration. And there are different levels of administration. There are support services, and usually it's found in the budget under administration and support services. All of those services are necessary to provide instruction. I believe the instruction amount for USD 259 is 87%, which is pretty darn good. But it depends on, and if you dig into it, there may be some differences. I know that will be a continual discussion as we look at funding education. I believe that we can answer the mandate or the instruction from the Supreme Court adequately without too much trouble and do that. I would also like to see us increase the funding for special education an additional 5%, up to at least 92% of what it actually costs to deliver the instruction for special education. And of course the 90 billion for million for I always muff those two for inflation.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely doable, and we should be able to get that accomplished and look at administration costs.
Okay. Well, and certainly you spent the last couple of years very steeped in education numbers. You're coming in a little fresher on this. What are you hearing, and kind of what's your perspective on things?
Well, and also I have a college son who was a product of the Wichita Public Schools, and so, being very involved, I've done what I can to try to be educated on the district's budget, as well as the funding issues across the state. Representative Carmichael brought an important point that my constituents, people across Kansas, as well as a lot of lawmakers, are asking, and that is what the perception is a very high administration and support cost. I believe Representative Carmichael quoted 20%, but to the representative's comment, it really comes down to how you calculate that. There are some people that will calculate it and say, well, by doing it this way, it's 1%, and somebody else may say it's 30%. It really comes down to no uniform formula for calculating it, but I do concur. I do think our administration and support costs are very high. Now, that may not be the case in every single district across our state, but it is a factor because there are a lot of support services that don't directly affect the children. For example, we have data analysis that are a part of the support staff that all they are responsible for is calculating the data, analyzing it, and presenting reports. Now, does that help, with planning? Possibly, but the kids aren't receiving a direct benefit from that. So I think we have to be honest about what direct classroom spending is versus indirect classroom spending.
Okay. I'm going to hop in real quick because I did spend the last year in the classroom, and I will tell you that as a teacher, getting that data can be very useful. Sure. Now, can having fewer kids in my classroom also be extremely useful and helpful to each child as well? Definitely. So the argument can be made either direction where you want to spend that money, and I think that's a big part of the budget battles we've been having.
And you can say, well, we need fewer people doing data analysis, and then the teachers end up doing more of the recording and compiling reports and so forth, rather than spending their time focused on instruction.
And that's definitely a lot of the complaints that I heard from special ed teachers. So, well, we're going to have to see what happens with that. I know that's going to be another huge debate this session. And lawmakers want to be ready to hit the ground running on Monday. To that end, many are already pre-filing bills they hope will become law. There's just a few that have made the news in the last week. Representatives Ponkawi Victors and Dennis Heiberger want Kansas to rename Columbus Day, calling it instead Indigenous Peoples Day, following in the footsteps of states like South Dakota and Hawaii and the cities of Lawrence and Wichita. While Representative Christy Williams wants Kansas to opt out of daylight saving time entirely. Representative John Carmichael wants to remove the Secretary of State's power to prosecute voting crimes, returning that power to the Attorney General's office where it traditionally stood. Senator Aletha Faust-Gudeau wants DCF to require contractors running the foster care system to keep track of the state funds they spend, something that's not happening right now, she says. Representative-elect Bill Riley wants to make spoofing illegal, and that's where telemarketers and scammers fake the number they're calling from, so you'll pick up. And Representative-elect Nick Hoheisel wants to exempt the purchase of required college textbooks from state sales tax laws. Okay, I gotta say, somebody who is still taking college classes working on my master's, I like that last one. That one speaks to me. But I guess my one question as we look at this topic, because there's so many different bills, and certainly we'll see a whole lot, and most of them will not get very far. And lots of very interesting ones. Most won't get very far. But are you starting to have fellow lawmakers lobby you on their various bills?
Yes. The textbook sales tax exemption, already heard Representative-elect Riley's robocall bill, and these are things that I can genuinely support and get behind as well, because they're things that I'm hearing about. I mean, the robocalls, I probably get half a dozen at least, if not more, per day, and that's with all kinds of filtering tools in place. Textbooks, as you've already pointed out, and of course my son can attest to at Washburn, those are small steps that we can make to make a meaningful impact on the lives of Kansans. So some of them certainly do deserve at least having some open debate about, for sure.
Yeah.
On the robocalls, when I downloaded that immediately and looked it over. I get a ton of robocalls every single day. My husband tracks them and he updates us on the no-call list constantly. He called it today and was told that this office is not operating due to the government shutdown.
Okay, we just went federal.
And I would just like to put in a word of thank you to former Representative Niall Dillmore, who wrote the first do not call list legislation in the state. And that operated very well, and then the federal government took it over and had the national do not call list, and unfortunately, to me, as far as I can see, it is much less enforceable.
Well, we may have to see. Kansas may step back up again, it sounds like. We'll have to see where that one goes. Well, the Air Force, talking about taking things federal, finally accepted the long-awaited Boeing tanker this week after a 2-year delay. As Cake's Portia Riley shows us, the KC-46 will soon call Wichita home.
After months of delays, the KC-46 is finally on its way to McConnell Air Force Base.
I know it's something that then Congressman Pompeo and the whole community fought hard for, and it seemed like it's taken a while, but we're excited to finally see that come through.
The Air Force just approved the tanker from Boeing, despite the unresolved problems with the plane. The camera system used for refueling has a glitch, but Boeing has agreed to pay for the fix.
Obviously, any major big new program like this, there's going to be some bugs and hiccups along the way that have to be worked out.
The Air Force says this is a major milestone for the next generation tanker and will allow airmen to begin operational testing and flight training.
Great news for our country's defense, obviously great news for McConnell to be able to have the Air Force accept the tanker.
The tanker can fly faster and on less fuel. It refuels in the air using pods and flexible hoses, but it can also load cargo. Last month, McConnell spokesman Daniel De La Faye talked about the importance of using the new tanker to help fly wounded to safety.
From the way we operate air medical evacuation to get those soldiers and airmen out of the war zone in Afghanistan to a hospital to get the care that they need, to bring the KC-46 home to Wichita where this capability belongs.
Portia Riley, Cake News on your side.
Okay, so tanker finally going to come here. Yep. What does that mean for Wichita? You guys both represent the Wichita area. It's something we fought for. What does it mean as we finally get it here?
It's a tremendous accomplishment for Wichita and Kansas as a whole. As an Air Force veteran myself, McConnell has a long history. It actually goes even further back than myself, but B-1 bombers to the KC-135s and now the KC-46s. So this is the next iteration for keeping McConnell very relevant to the warfighting effort, the job creation that comes from that, the economic growth that comes from that. You're going to see an influx of airmen transferring into McConnell to support this mission. So I'm very proud to see this finally come to Wichita and actually become reality.
I live in Southeast Wichita, represent a district in Southeast Wichita with a lot of personnel from McConnell in my district. Recently, I attended a presentation on the new tankers that are coming by the Air Force, and it was fascinating. It is really high tech, and I have a hard time understanding how they're going to accomplish this, but it is absolutely wonderful for Wichita. It is wonderful that I think there were other communities in the running, Nebraska and other places, and hallelujah, it's finally coming.
We were starting to wonder, weren't we?
We were.
All right, well.
So was McConnell.
That is true, that is true. During President Trump's speech on last Tuesday, he urged Americans to call lawmakers. KSN's Craig Andrus asked the Kansas delegation if they were getting those calls, and they all said yes.
90% of which
after President Trump reached out to the American people to make phone calls to lawmakers about the government shutdown and the border wall, Summit's Sunflower Community Action in Wichita went to work on the phones.
So we had been reaching out to our contacts, our base, to ask them to call our representatives and hold them accountable, both sides.
Lupe Magdaleno, the executive director with Sunflower, says they continue to make calls because they believe a border wall is perhaps not in the best interest of immigrants or the U.S. long term. Meanwhile, Congressman Ron Estes of Kansas' 4th District saying they're getting calls and sent us this, saying an overwhelming majority of calls to our office have been supportive of the president's address to the nation last night and his plans for much-needed border security. Also, U.S. Senator Pat Roberts' office responding to KSN about calls they were getting and said, "We do track the numbers, but don't give them out. It's trending more in favor of increasing border security and building the wall." Sunflower leaders say while Kansas delegation members confirm the majority of calls are in favor of border security, they are still encouraging everyone to call, saying lawmakers need to hear more from each side on the issue of border security and that government shutdown.
But also making those calls to legislators, telling them your story, telling them, where we are down here, needing those programs to feed our families. And so really making those phone calls.
And my coverage of the shutdown has been more along the lines of the impact that it has had on Kansans, from I hadn't thought about the no-call list that you suggested, to folks who are worried about getting their SNAP benefits, and folks who are waiting on HUD renters assistance and that sort of thing. Are you guys hearing anything from constituents who are struggling with impact from the shutdown at all?
I haven't heard anything. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the talking points are the ones we hear from the national news, in terms of what we see around the country. But directly here in Wichita, South Central Kansas, I've not heard a whole lot of commentary about any impacts from folks. In fact, to be real honest, a lot of folks that I talk to, even though they'll give you an opinion on things like border security and the wall, they're really not that's not usually the focal point of what they're wanting us as legislators to impact. They're really wanting us to look at, immigration reform within our state in terms of its impact on our economy, budget, and finances, because at the end of the day, border security really is a federal issue.
We're not hearing anything directly right now, but I imagine as the session starts up, and if this continues, we will begin to hear from people with agencies that will be reporting back that money is drying up because the federal government for certain programs usually feeds it to the state either quarterly or maybe even just twice a year. And so some of those will begin to end. There may be contracts that will end, there are grants that may not be flowing, so we will begin to hear about it.
Yeah. Well, and we know at this point that it will become the longest shutdown in U.S. history because Congress has adjourned for the weekend and they won't be back until after they've gone into the record levels. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, Michael, for joining me. I've enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you so much.
We'd also like to thank KSN and Cake News for sharing their stories with us. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.